A man is in critical condition after he was shot in South Baltimore this afternoon. The investigation underway.
And that's a concern for everyone. African American students being at the very bottom of everything. We should be searching for the root cause.
And searching for the root cause. Hear from the president of the Maryland chapter of the NAACP. The event happening next week to address a struggling education.
And parts of the state are under a code orange air quality alert for tomorrow. I'll let you know when conditions will improve coming up.
Live from WBFF in Baltimore, this is Fox 45 News at 10.
The ridiculous and baseless indictment of me by the Biden administration's weaponized Department of Injustice will go down as among the most horrific abuses of power in the history of our country.
Just a day after 37 federal charges were brought against him, former President Trump is speaking out, blasting federal prosecutors all ahead of Tuesday's arraignment. Coming up in about 10 minutes, more from Trump and how this case could unfold. And we're following breaking news. Baltimore police have another homicide investigation, this time in Southwest Baltimore, not far from the West Side Shopping Center. Police say around 5 this evening, they found a man who had been shot in the chest along Ashton Street in the Carrollton Ridge neighborhood. That man has not yet been identified, and there's no word on the suspect. And thank you so much for joining us. I'm Vincent Hill. Maxine has the night off. Tonight, we want to take you into decades of struggle in Baltimore to tame an unrelenting gun violence epidemic, an epidemic that this year has been ruthless against young people. Today, Fox 45 News was around Baltimore as hundreds of students continue to graduate into their future. But that's not going to be the reality for at least 10 students who have lost their lives this year to gun violence. Addressing the youth crime crisis has been a daunting issue for the city, especially the police department. This week, Commissioner Harrison announced he's stepping down, saying it's the right move for the city. So with the new top cop, will next school year be any different when it comes to youth violence? High school graduation, a day to reflect on the past and look to the future.
Let's go, Mervo, class of 2020.
Today at Mervo High School, countless teens taking their next steps. But for 17-year-old Jeremiah Brogdon, today never came.
This happened while students were exiting the school. This happened while school police were outside in the yard with the students.
Gunned down just outside the school after an argument with another student. Fast forward to January.
School police were very quick to arrive on the scene, also began to render life-saving measures and first aid to the 5 victims.
5 Westside High School students shot just across the street at the Edmondson Shopping Center. 16-year-old Deontay Dorsey killed. By mid-March, 7 Baltimore City School teens shot and killed.
What we know right now is that this young male victim is, in fact, a student at Patterson High School.
Including 16-year-old Patterson High student Isaiah Carter. With the new school year now months away, Baltimore's new acting commissioner, Richard Worley.
That's the biggest thing that is really we've struggled with as a city is a lot of young men and women are being shot in their streets.
Acknowledging the youth crime crisis.
A lot of young people are ending up with guns in their hands.
At this week's announcement, Worley not promising many changes to fighting crime.
Continue the work that we've been doing for the last 4.5 years.
However, law enforcement analyst Melissa Pinkleton.
Baltimore has a chance to capitalize on this.
Says policies like GVRS and Safe Streets have failed when it comes to keeping teens safe. And with the new commissioner needs to come new changes.
If you get somebody in there who is just going to toe whatever line's been towed for the last 5 years, you can't ignore the fact that Baltimore is down 500 officers, is having shootings every weekend, has a problem with their juveniles.
So that brings us to our question of the day. Do you have confidence in Richard Worley to address the youth violence we're seeing? You can vote right now at foxbaltimore.com/vote. From youth crime to poor education, civil rights leaders in Maryland have set a date next week to meet with state educators. They want to fix poor education outcomes, and especially among African-American students. Taylor Stewart has more.
The academic achievement of Black and brown students reaching an inflection point across the state. Now, the Maryland NAACP wants to meet with public school leaders next week to improve what they call the critical status of African American students. On Monday, the group released this public statement saying it's attempted to work with state and local education agencies to remedy the dreadful education circumstances for African American children in public schools.
The reality of public education, as you know, for the state, triggered the letter.
NAACP Maryland chapter president joining FOX45 Morning News to discuss the situation that, according to the NAACP, is intolerable and getting worse with ripple effects.
And the concern came out of years of challenges that come with African American students being at the very bottom of everything. And that's a concern for everyone, because that stimulates the reality of what happens with crime, what happens with all these issues that are not directly related to education.
The statement lays out lagging academic achievement, students graduating without necessary proficiency, and a breakdown in school discipline when it comes to Black and brown students across the state. All symptoms of an overarching issue President Flowers says it's time to get to the bottom of.
We should be searching for the root cause. There should be some strategy to look at the front-end situations that create these challenges that students have in the public schools, when it comes to test scores, when it comes to the details of how they interact with discipline issues, when it comes with who can be identified for special support, IEPs.
That's the goal of Thursday's conference. Get all Maryland school leaders, superintendents, and educators in the room to discuss what is in fact contributing to the trend of lagging school performance, particularly in predominantly African American school districts like Prince George's County and Baltimore City, two districts with the state's lowest graduation rates.
The goal should be not to look in the macro, to be so upset or concerned about what happens on the back end, but how and what best method for each school district to get nestled into what an individual child and their family needs as supports.
Flowers says it's time to peel back the layers and get some definitive answers and solutions, because he says Black students have for too long been left behind.
It's all hands on deck. Anyone who walks into the school or concerned about the school is an educator. Everyone plays a role. If we work like that in these times.
That conference takes place this upcoming Thursday and Friday. Registration information is on our website, foxbaltimore.com.
Now, many of the Maryland NAACP's concerns are also cited in a lawsuit filed against Baltimore City Schools that captured the attention of civil rights attorney Ben Crump. Crump joined that lawsuit in July of last year after it was filed by Baltimore residents Giovanni and Shonda Patterson. The Pattersons claim the city is misusing tax dollars because students aren't getting enough education properly. In November of 2022, a judge denied the city's motion to dismiss the lawsuit, allowing the case to move forward. A struggling education system, a high crime rate, and little economic opportunities. Now, these are problems in Baltimore, but also in many other American cities. Tonight, Kai Jackson takes us into a gathering of Black educators and activists and policymakers working to find solutions to problems facing Black communities.
We're at an interesting point in history.
Daquan Lawrence is a research analyst from New York. He's among Black educators, policymakers, and activists at the State of the Black World Conference in Baltimore in April at the Convention Center.
Where there's a lot of potential, but then at the same time, we have a lot of social and political issues.
The group was founded in 2001. They're trying to find solutions to problems facing Black communities in America and across the globe. Issues like deadly violence, lack of education, and high unemployment. Charges of a failing education system is why nationally known attorney Ben Crump joined a lawsuit against Baltimore City Schools.
We owe our children at least the basic quality education, but without a quality education, their future is so bleak from day one.
Dr. Ron Daniels is one of the founders of the conference. He believes a good education is important and says that must include economic inclusion for Black citizens. Yet he's blunt in his belief of why many African Americans have seemingly been left behind or locked up.
Well, I would say existentially what we are facing in this country and around the globe, and it's emanating from here, is the disease and infection of white nationalism and institutional racism, which is now full-blown and out in the open.
We pressed Dr. Daniels about the difference between systemic problems versus accountability for individual actions. In Baltimore, more than 300 people have been killed for 8 consecutive years, much of that due to gun violence. This year, a record number of juveniles have been killed.
Well, but what does accountability look like? I do want to hold people accountable. But on the other hand, we also have to go to the root causes of why people are doing what they are doing.
Ron Hampton is a retired cop. He worked with D.C. police for 24 years and now offers wisdom for settling disputes and solving problems. Hampton says investment is key.
I believe we need to invest more and empower our social services system because we have a lot of mental health. We have a lot of issues in terms of families and other things that are going on.
An investment in accountability is what attorney Ben Crump is calling for in Baltimore. He believes the city and state owe that to its students.
Because if the citizens can make sure that we have accountability and productivity, then that could be a model for cities just like Baltimore and every state in America. And our children would be the better for it.
Some believe when more young people receive a quality education, they'll be less likely to face the types of problems the Black World Conference is trying to solve. Alicia Lindo is a 20-year-old college student from New York. She understands the challenges, but remains optimistic.
And my grandma always says, united we stand and, separate we fall. So it's really enforcing that belief that, we can't do much if we're all divided.
And we'll have more on the conference on our website, foxbaltimore.com.
The bill is going to be coming soon, and it's time to start preparing.
And after a 3-year pause, student loan repayments are about to resume. The number of Americans expected to struggle to make those payments. Plus, the pending decision from the Supreme Court on the president's plan to cancel student debt. And former President Trump makes a campaign appearance after dozens of federal criminal charges were filed against him. A look at how his case could play out next week.
And right now we have moderate air quality. That's okay, but tomorrow we're back in that sensitive range and a code orange is in place for parts of the state. I'll let you know when the air quality finally improves coming up in my Weather Authority forecast.
Back now at the Fox 45 quad box, the man known as the Unabomber has died at 81. Ted Kaczynski was found dead this morning in his North Carolina prison cell. For nearly 20 years, the Harvard-trained mathematician ran a deadly nationwide bombing campaign. He was arrested back in 1996. Ukraine is on the counteroffensive against Russia. It's the first time we're seeing this in the war. We understand Ukrainian forces, who were recently empowered by Western aid, are clashing right now with Russian troops in 3 regions. White House sources confirm China has been operating a spy base in Cuba since at least 2019. Now, this comes after that spy balloon saga back in January. Next week, Secretary of State Antony Blinken will travel to China. That trip was canceled back in January. Former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has quit as a lawmaker. Boris has faced mounting criticism hosting parties during the COVID-19 pandemic. He issued a pointed resignation letter accusing his opponents of trying to force him out. Former President Trump makes his first public appearance since his indictment on federal charges. He spoke this afternoon at a Republican convention in Georgia. The former president insisting he's innocent and rallied against the Justice Department.
This vicious persecution is a travesty of justice.
The 37 counts stem from an investigation into his handling of classified documents after he left the White House. The charges include obstruction, conspiracy, and making false statements to investigators.
As far as the joke of an indictment, it's a horrible thing. It's a horrible thing for this country. I mean, the only good thing about it is it's driven my poll numbers way up. Can you believe it? Documents fell under what is known as the Presidential Records Act, which is not at all a criminal act. Everything. It's all judged by the Presidential Records Act. In this whole fake indictment, they don't even once mention the Presidential Records Act, which is really the ruling act, which this case falls under 100%, because they want to use something called the Espionage Act. Documents fell under what is known as the Presidential Records Act, which is not at all a criminal act. Everything. It's all.
Trump made his second appearance in North Carolina at the state GOP convention. At that same convention, former Vice President Mike Pence said he is, quote, deeply troubled by the federal government's prosecution of his former boss.
Former President of the United States facing an unprecedented indictment by a Justice Department run by the current President of the United States and a potential political rival.